Now, Reverend Meeks asked me to come this morning and speak about black history. He knows that one of the things that I deeply enjoy and appreciate doing is talking about the dilemmas of black folk in America. That comes from my mother, who used to sit and read to me from the Bible when I was a young man. And I used to sit and watch her cry and soak her feet at night, because in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, she had to work in a tobacco factory where she'd stand up all day long and stem tobacco until her fingers would bleed. She would come home and soak them. And I would sit there and cry with her. And I would say, one day, I want to be like Samson out of the Bible and go back and fight for black folk to correct these kind of conditions for black folk in the land. So I won't be any more black mothers suffering like my mother suffered. And so what I did, I tried my best after being in politics and all levels of politics for a number of years, being in the White House with President Carter, being over education for the state of Florida, being the black first assistant secretary in the United States Department of Commerce, and being over a board of governors, chairman for a board of governors. I said I must bring all my intelligence and experience to bear to see if I can solve some of these problems for black people in this country. And so the first thing I did, I wrote a book called Black Labor, White Wealth, to define the problems for black folk in America like it's never been defined before. It ain't about all this stuff about personalities. It's about what are the conditions that precipitated black folk getting into this dilemma. And what Black Labor, White Wealth did, it tracked 800 years of history in very systematic terms to show you every strategy, every technique, every law, every public custom, and every public policy that was used to enslave black folk around the world and to maldistribute almost 100% of all this nation's wealth, power, resource, privileges, businesses, and controls of all levels of government into the hands of the dominant white society. And what slavery and Jim Crow segregation did with black folk, it intentionally maldistributed all the resources away from black folk and created a real-life monopoly game. Black folk in America are playing in a real-life monopoly game that you're totally ill-prepared to play and win. And if you know anything about monopoly, monopoly is based on everybody sitting down and getting a fair share of the resources, the money in their hand before the game starts. Black folk, you can't play because you never got your 40 acres and a mule. You're sitting and playing a game that you're not going to win. And if you know anything about monopoly, the primary principles that go around the board and take the money that you have and buy land and buy the best land around the board. And if you can't buy land, then you buy businesses like electric company, the railroad, and the water company. And you buy your land, and when you develop your land, you put houses on it. And once you could receive enough rent from people landing on your houses, you then take your money and buy hotels. And then after you buy the hotels, you sit there and wait for all the rest to come around and land on your property and bring some wealth and power home to you. And see, my people have been playing real-life monopoly with no money, going around the board hoping the world that they can land on free park and income tax and charity. And you play that kind of a game in real-life monopoly, sooner or later you're going to land on the wrong property. And you land on the wrong property in monopoly, you got two choices. You either go to jail or you go bankrupt and get out of the game. And black folk are playing in a real-life monopoly game. And I wrote Black Labor, White Wealth to tell you exactly what the game was and how you're not playing it right. And then I followed that up with another book called Powernomics, says now, that tracks and picks up exactly where Black Labor, White Wealth left off. And I'm delighted by the fact that black folk took that book, Black Labor, White Wealth, and went to Geneva, Switzerland, and filed for reparations around the world. And that book then sets the premise of what your problem is in America. In America, your problem is simple. You do not own and control anything of wealth and resources. You do not own and control anything more than 1/2 or 1% of anything important in the society. And yet, by the same token, you're bearing 600 to 800 times your fair share of everything that's bad. And consequently, we cannot play and win, and people wonder why black folk live the way they do, why every black neighborhood looks like Beirut bombed out. It's that way because we do not own and control any resources and never have. And so in Powernomics, I said, if you're going to play the game, here's a book that I've systematically analyzed all the conditions around the world with all of my experiences, not only in government and in education, but also as a safety and survival engineer for the Marine Corps, where I had to try to deal with our prisoners coming out of POW camps. Here's how you play the game and win. Empowernomics, the national plan to empower black folk. That book and all those books are going to be in the rear room and for you to purchase this morning. But most importantly, the third book that I wrote was called Dirty Little Secrets About Black History, Black Heroes, and Other Troublemakers. And I've written 2 of those books. And the purpose of those books are to tell you that you are special people, very special people as black folk. That absolutely nothing has happened in the last 400 or 500 years that black folk did not either directly were involved in or indirectly did not cause. You were the engines that drove civilizations around the world for 300 years. You as black folk are not guests in America. You are not guests on this earth. You walk on sacred ground paid for by the blood, sweat, and tears and suffering and sacrificing of millions of black people. They paid for you to walk on this earth with your head high and to be proud. All the blacks who shine shoes and wash clothes and wash dishes and pick cotton, you all deserve to have a better condition on this earth. And Dirty Little Secrets tell you why you're special people. And later on in my discourse this morning, I'm going to point out the 3 things I'm going to talk about. First is the state of black America presently. Second thing is how we got into our dilemma. The third thing to tell you that you are not only special people on this earth, but you've always had a special relationship with God that no other people have ever had. And all of that is embedded in the one thing that you keep running away from, and that is your blackness. Your blackness is power. The most powerful thing on this earth is your blackness. And you got to understand by the time I finish today what power in blackness there is. And unfortunately, we've never used it. We've been too much like the biblical scriptures in Matthew 26 that talks about 14 through 30 about the 10 talents and the 3 slaves. And we have tended to be like that third slave. When you had a master in the Bible that took and gave wealth and talents to 3 slaves, and he went off traveling in a distant land, and when he came back and asked for a report on what they'd done with the money, the talents that he'd given them, the first 2 told the master, here's what I got now. I've invested what you gave me. I invested the talents and the gifts that you gave me, and I have multiplied it. I've doubled what you gave me. The third one, when he asked him, what did you do with the money I gave you and the resource and talents and the gifts? He said, I didn't do anything with them. I buried it because I was scared to use what I had, the gifts and the talents that you've given me. That reminds me like of black folk that I don't want you to be like that anymore. To hide the talents and the gifts that you've been given. And the master said to the third slave, get away from me. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take away all the talents and gifts that I've given you. And I'm going to give them to everybody else except you. And then I'm going to cast you into the darkness, into blackness. And so all I want to hear from the future from you is suffering and crying and pain. And that's what has happened to us in many respects as black folk. We've given up the specialness that we have as black folk in our black power, the power of our blackness and our special relationship that we had with God. And consequently, we are in a dilemma. And contrary to what anybody on earth tells you, I don't care whether it comes out of a black mouth or a white mouth, anybody on this earth that tells you that black folk are progressing is lying to you. In proportional and comparative terms, black folk are exactly where they were in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. You have not moved not 1 iota in 140 years. You were on the bottom in 1860, you're still on the bottom. You're still outside and underneath our system, our economic structure. I don't care whether they're boom periods or bust periods. I don't care whether they're good times or depression or recession. You're outside and underneath. Consequently, when whites catch colds, you're going to catch pneumonia. You're not a part of the system. And right now, as I said, in 1860, as an example, at that time, you had approximately 287,000 black people that were free. That was in quasi-freedom. They weren't really free, they were quasi-free. They were not enslaved. The other 4.5 million blacks were still on plantations and in slavery. And those 287,000 black folk has successfully acquired one half of 1% of this nation's wealth in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. I don't even picking cotton or having their own little businesses or waiting on tables. They had acquired one half of 1% of this nation's wealth. And here we are, 140 years later, when you're supposedly free and gone through a civil rights movement, you still only own and control one half of 1% of this nation's wealth. You have not moved one iota in acquiring the most significant and the most important thing in our society. It is not civil rights. It is not integration that's going to give you equality and equal opportunity. It is what you own and control that makes a difference in your society. If you own and control nothing, you'll get nothing. There is no equal opportunity without having the equal amount of resources and power and wealth to be able to carry it out. And black folk at that time, as I said, had one half of 1%. Also in 1860, as an example to show you have not progressed. At that time, I check around in all the books that I've read all these years, almost 99% of all the black people in America were working at that time in some capacity, making money, wealth, power, income, businesses, and personal comfort for whites. And now I look around the society 140 years later in all of America, and still 98% of all black people in America are still working either in white corporations or some level of government or working for other people, making money, wealth, and personal comfort for them. Only 2% of all the black people in America work in their own communities and their own businesses for their own people. The rest are still trying to be working in levels of government, federal, state, city, school teachers, and working for someone else. We only got 2% that can call themselves independent. Also, I looked to see what was happening in 1860 versus today. I looked at all the prisons across the country documented in research. In Savannah, Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, in Boston, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. I looked at the prison rolls. Even though you only had 287,000 black folk who were free, black people made up over 51% of the prisoners in 1860. Even though only 287,000 were free, the other 4.5 million still locked in slavery, you still made up 51% of the prisoners. Here you are today, 140 years later, as happy as you want to be, but yet still, 51% of the prisoners in the United States are still black. You talk about at that time, all those blacks who were out of slave, most of them couldn't even get jobs because of high unemployment. Because nobody wanted it. They were either unemployed or underemployed. I look around across America, and now everybody on TV is talking about the possibility of losing jobs with the coming recession or depression. It's not going to impact black folk that much because you've always been unemployed and underemployed. Contrary to what you read in the papers every day and hear in the media, the unemployment rate for black folk is not what you keep hearing. You keep hearing that the unemployment rate for black folk is twice that for whites. That is a lie. That's one of the biggest tales ever been told. Unemployment rates in this country are decided based on two factors. One, are people who are actively in the market searching for jobs, and two, those who are receiving unemployment compensation. Black folk have a hidden unemployment rate in this country that is nationally, that is 35%. Now consider that in the context that even in the Great Depression of the 1920s and 1930s, the unemployment rate was 25%. But when the unemployment rate went to 25% in the 1920s, white societies considered that to be disastrous. And they committed every resource they had, every level of government to get in there and bring down the unemployment rate. Here, black unemployment rate in America is 35% and nobody cares. You haven't heard one person talk about let's create programs and opportunities to bring down the unemployment rate for black folk that's fixed and locked in at 35%. And that's not the bad part of it. You go to most of these urban areas like Baltimore, the unemployment rate for blacks is 48%. In Detroit, Michigan, the unemployment rate for blacks in Detroit is 48%. In Pittsburgh, it's 49%. In New York, for black men, it's 51%. For black youth, it's 89%. You cannot make it that way. There's only three things that you can do to earn a living and be able to compete in a society. The only way you're going to solve the problems of the youth, you got three choices. You either got to get a business up here, or have a job at the top. If you don't have a business and a job, you must go down to the second level. The second level is you must then go on welfare, look for food stamps and handouts and charity. If someone comes along who's a conservative and they say, well, and they kick you off of welfare by cutting out the welfare programs, then your only other choice is going down to the next level. The next level is crime. You must go through either working a job and having a business, going on welfare, or going into the criminal roles. You must do a combination, elaboration, or sophistication of those three things to survive. Unless you have some kind of magical ability to simply to evaporate and disappear. That's the only thing. You must do one of those three things. And now that black folk don't have any businesses, they don't have any jobs, you cut out the welfare rolls, and now you're amazed by why the crime is going up in your neighborhoods. The crime rate is going to continue to exacerbate and go up until somebody get enough sense, enough commitment to solve some of these problems that have never been solved for black folk. The first thing they should have done when you came before the civil rights movement started is say, what was the purpose? What was the purpose of slavery and Jim Crow segregation in the first place? Nobody's asked that and tried to resolve it. It did not happen by accident. Slavery and Jim Crow segregation did not happen by accident. It was intentionally inflicted on black folk. It was intentionally inflicted for purposes. And what was the purpose? To maldistribute all the resources and business and money and wealth into the hands of the larger dominant society. Now, how in the world can you keep talking about equality and equal opportunity when you haven't corrected it? You don't own and control anything, so what are you correcting? How are you going to have an equal opportunity? You got an equal opportunity to go down and buy a Mercedes or Bentley right now. If you don't have the money in your pocket, you go no place. And so consequently, we haven't resolved it. We're still stuck at that point. And we have not solved any of the problems. And we have not solved them because, again, we've not focused on the primary problems that we have in our society, which is how do you deal with a black people who are becoming a permanent underclass. If we don't solve these problems by the year 2010, I can guarantee you, as I predicted in all my other books, and every one of my predictions hit right on the money. By 2010, blacks in America will become a permanent underclass of beggars and criminals. If you do not solve these problems, as the conditions worse, if you do not solve the problems of trying to help the black community strengthen itself, you're going down. Now, and the first thing you do is understand what we should be doing. We should understand what the Bible said. Get knowledge, but more importantly, get understanding. Understand what you're up against. You're up against racism. Now, how did racism come into existence? Racism never existed on this earth. It never existed on this earth until the 1500s. You never had racism on the earth. Racism came into existence when 9 European nations, when Arab Middle Easterners and some Asians all of a sudden decided that they want to enrich themselves by building colonies in the newly discovered world, which was the Americas. South America, North America, and Latin America. They got into a contest. In the 1400s, Europe was decimated. It was being devastated by poverty, disease, famine, and crime. And Europe wanted to lift itself. And they found out that way back in 1442, when the Pope had been given by Henry the Navigator, given 16 slaves, and they'd used those slaves in the Catholic Church, very productively in the Catholic Church. So by 1488, Pope Innocent put out a public edict, says if you want to enrich yourself and move up, get yourself some slaves out of Africa. And so then all those European countries said that we can lift ourselves off the back of Africa and African resources and African black labor. And so then all the European nations got into a contest, what you all call a race to develop South America, North America, and Central America. That's when the race started. And everybody was taking blacks out of Africa for about $15 to $20 a head and selling them in this country for about a 1,500% profit margin, for about $325 each. And they began to enrich themselves. And so racism started. Slavery did not create racism. Racism created slavery. And as we move through it, and slavery and racism are economic issues. They have, and I want to disabuse you of any misconceptions. It has nothing in the world to do. Racism has nothing in the world to do with getting along with people. It has nothing in the world to do with bias, bigotry, hatred, or discrimination, or prejudice. Those things have nothing to do with racism. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people that are competing to own and control resources and wealth and power. And once they acquire a significant amount of it, they then use it against another group to enslave them, to discriminate, to shut them out and tell them who they can marry, whether or not they can go to school, or to maldistribute the educational funds for the schooling of another child. That's what racism is. It is a competitive relationship, and it's economic based. It started out as economics in the 1500s, and by the 1700s, it switched over and became a religious issue. It became a religious issue in the 1700s as the evangelical movement moved across America. And they wanted some justification for what they were doing to black folk, about how they were enslaving. And so then they had, the Bible was modified. The King Edward version was modified. They started telling me, use certain scriptures in here to justify the enslavement of black folk. And to teach black folk to use the Bible to hold some of them enslaved. And so that a slave would not revolt if he thought he was revolting against God. And teach him that he is to be obedient and humble and to work hard and be hardworking and to look for pie in the sky after death. And so they used it. So at that time, slavery became a religious issue. And it stayed a religious issue all the way up until about 1859, 1 year before the Civil War, 2 years before the Civil War broke out. At that time, Charles Darwin wrote a book, a relative scripture he calls The Survival of the Fittest, and the survival of the species. And what he did in there, he drew some lineages saying if an elephant is bigger than a mouse, and a mouse is bigger than an amoeba, there's a vertical line between a tree and grass, and the highest is always superior to the lowest. And in doing that analysis, he says that since whites now, as a result of slavery, whites have acquired almost 100% ownership of everything, then obviously they are superior to black folk, the slave who owns nothing. And at that point in 1859, the issue changed then. From an economic or religious issue, it became a biological issue. And then after that point on, up until the present time, they started putting on your driver's license, on your birth certificate, what race you belong to. And at that time, see, the dominant society had acquired almost 99%, or not 100%, control of everything. And so the dominant society was on a mountain, and black folk were in the ditch. The dominant society had received everything and controlled everything, the black person in the ditch. So what they did then, they took the word race, R-A-C-E. They took the word race, they cut the E off the end of it, and they stuck on a suffix. The suffix is I-S-M. I-S-M is a suffix that means maintain the prevailing conditions. Let nothing change. And they stuck ISM on. That's what racism is. Racism means that now that whites own and control everything and blacks own nothing, keep it that way. And that prevailed all the way up through the Civil Rights Movement in 1960, which means that anybody who accepts the racist philosophies, it's not about who's superior, it's about who owns and controls. Therefore, the philosophy is be conservative. Let nothing move from white hands to black hands. That is racism. Let nothing move from white hands to black hands. So consequently, the dominant society developed these philosophies that say, I'm opposed to reparation, I'm opposed to affirmative action, I'm opposed to set-asides and preferential treatment for black folk, because that would put them in a position to get resources and ownership and control. That's what racism. So racism is anything that will keep black folk from changing those conditions, from getting out of that ditch. That's the issue. That issue has remained constant. That's the same issue that you're going to run into now, whether you're talking about getting money from a bank or whether you're talking about the Obama campaign. The issue in the Obama campaign has nothing to do with Obama's qualifications. You live in our society now where white skin is associated and identified with meaning authority, wealth, and power. And you're smoking something that's illegal if you don't understand that, because it means that they're not going to let you put Obama in if they can stop it. Obama means that means if Obama goes in, you're crushing the white psyche in a sense of saying that whiteness no longer represents authority and power and wealth. And the other greatest fear they have is that if he gets in at that point, if he gets in, that means that in our country, symbolically, that the family that lives in the White House is known as the first family. Do you think in your wildest dream do you think in your wildest dream that all of a sudden this white country will say, now, although the first family is a black family, that's one of them nigger families up there, and they're the first family. And then and Michelle sitting in the White House when the wife of the president is known as the first lady. Do you think, for an instance, that white women in this country are going to let a black woman be known as the first lady? And the issue right now between, whether it was with Hillary Clinton or now with Sarah Palin, the issue is not what you all come here, and the issue is what we call genderized racism that goes all the way back to 1840s. Starting in the 1840s, when they started to get blacks out of slavery and an abolition movement started to eradicate slavery in the country. At that time, the women's issue jumped up in 1840s. And what they're saying is that before you ever give anything to black folk, it must come to a white woman first. And it must come to a white woman first. Why? Because a white woman is a natural extension of the white man. She is his second in command. Whether you're in a plantation or you're in modern day society, she is next in line to receive that which he does no longer want or can't get. And white women in history co-own, co-control, co-influence, and inherited 100% of everything that the white man had. The only thing she didn't have, what she claimed, was she didn't have the right to vote. That's a lie. She did have the right to vote. From ever since going back to the 1600s, white women could vote. They could always vote. But the rule was that you had to own property to be able to vote. And white women who owned property could vote. But they used this thing about the white women not being allowed to vote as a generator of a white enthusiasm to impede blacks coming out of the ditch after slavery. And white women then opposed the civil rights laws and the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendment. And then again in 1919, when they came back from the service, and the black men coming back to the military want to exert themselves, that's why they gave the 19th Amendment into the Constitution, or enacted into the Constitution. Because white women said, if you give us the right to vote, we'll help you protect yourselves against any uprising by blacks who are coming back from the returning soldiers, or from the Urban League that was just created, or the NAACP. So white women got the right to vote in 1919. But black women didn't get the right to vote until the 1960s. She was not included in that. And now the issue right now is that with Obama, is that they're going to find anything. That's why you see all these white women flocking around Hillary, then leaving Hillary and running over to McCain. That's to say that we will find anybody before we put a black man in the power. And we have to understand what the game is. If you're going to play this game, you must learn how to practice group economics and group politics. You better learn fast. You got to learn how to pool your resources and build communities. You got to build communities just like in this city. The reason you're impoverished in this city as black folk is because you failed to do what you should have done. As I said, going back to Matthew, you buried your wealth, you buried your gifts. And consequently, like those other slaves got everything that went right past them in the Bible, in the parable, they went right past you in this life, in this society. That's why the Asians got an Asian town, a Chinatown. You got a Greek town, a Pole town, a Hockey town, Cork town, a little Cambodia, a little Hialeah, a little Havana. But you can't find a black town in America any place. Because you've gone and buried all your resources. You buried your gifts. And I keep telling black folk, you are special people. You had a special relationship with God. If you go back to Genesis 1, and you see it says in there that in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And then God also said, now that we've created heaven and earth, let's create man in our likeness. Let's create man in our image. And now when he created man, who was created? The black man in Africa. Now, there are people who say, well, Dr. Anderson, now, wait a minute, wait a minute. When they say they're going to create man in their image and their likeness, they weren't talking about skin. Yes, they were. I got all kind of ministers, friends of mine that don't understand that. They keep saying, well, no, what he was talking about was giving the man on earth some godlike qualities. No, he didn't. God wasn't that silly. He wasn't going to give man on earth the qualities of God. They weren't going to give him, they said, well, they'd give him the temperament. No, he didn't have any, Adam didn't get any godly temperaments. He didn't get any godly wisdom. He didn't get any godly understanding. What all Adam got was the image and the likeness of the people who created him, and that was skin color. And that's told to you throughout the Bible, even though we don't understand it. And it's in that context that you start looking around and they say, well, you sure he was black? Yes, he was black. Anybody who's done any kind of studies will tell you that man originated in Africa, that the Garden of Eden was in Africa, in darkest Africa. Now, I know black folk, even in the congregation, you want to get away from blackness. But if you do it, you're defiling God. There's a rule. Just like in the Matthew's parable, which says, if you go hide your gifts, you hide your gifts. God says, if I give you a gift, I'm angry if you hide it and bury it and don't use it to enhance yourself and your people and your people's condition. One of the things they found out as scientists, and I got other people in the science area found out through different kind of studies and the astrology and astrological studies, they found out that in the heavens right now, that there is a dark hole, a black hole in the heavens. The black hole is so powerful that it's frightening to astrologers right now. They know that in the universe, there is a black hole that has movement. It has the ability to attract objects into it and destroy it. It can attract and destroy it. And that's one of the biggest things that's holding space exploration back. They're scared of that black hole in space that has the ability to attract and destroy it. They don't know whether that's God or not out there that's black like that. That is a fighting prospect for them. We also got scientists that have all of a sudden discovered now that there's a cloth. They've created a cloth called black cloth that is so powerful that it can attract light into it. It can attract light into it, and you can put things inside of it and almost make the things disappear because that black cloth is so powerful to attract light. We've done DNA studies, and the Discovery Channel did a big thing on this. They found out that not only did all humans migrate out of Africa, but they've done DNA studies that track back to Africa, and they found something in the DNA system, coding system, called SNPs, S-N-P, but it's pronounced SNPs, that says that the further you move away from darkest Africa, the weaker human beings become. That the most powerful and strongest human beings on earth were those who are still in darkest Africa in the DNA structure. As you move away from Africa and you lose your darkness, you also lose a lot of your immunities. And most of the body immunity to be able to protect yourself. And that's why I'm saying if you want to look at this stuff, you go find it out. Blackness has power, and we were given this power. The first human beings on earth were black. And also if you go look at stuff like fruits, the darkest fruit has the best vitamin and mineral. Okay, you got me before I got there, you know. And the potency of blackness is all around us. That's why in this country in 1924, that country is still fearful of blackness. They passed a law in 1924 called the one drop of blood rule, which says that one drop of black blood is more powerful than an endless amount of white blood. And that rule still holds true when people say he's black and he's got black blood, and people don't want to take black blood because they're scared of it. And that's the issue you're going to run in with Obama. It's not his education. He's not that he's an elitist. He's not that he's graduated from Howard. The fact of the matter is that he's got black skin and black blood in him. And that is the fear. And I used to have these conversations in my mind with God, and I said, well, God, but all these black folk, they don't want to be black. I said, what have you done special for black folk? And God says, I made them black. That was the first thing I did. I said, but God, you don't understand these black folks. I mean, you made them black, but they don't see that as being positive. But look, God, they don't even like the hair. He said, I gave them hair just like the same kind of hair I gave my son, Jesus, when he came to the earth. I created Jesus in my image, and I sent him to the earth, and he had the same skin and the same hair that you said your people don't like on the earth. I said, God, but they don't believe me when I tell them that. Can you give me a little more proof? He said, well, when I sent Moses up on the mountain, and I told Moses I would perform a miracle for you, I want you to prove, I'm going to show you my power. Stick your hand inside your bosom, inside your breast. And Moses stuck it in. When he pulled it out, it was white. He said, now put it back in, and I'll turn it back to its original color. I mean, you don't have to have more than a third grade education to figure out what skin color he was. If you still haven't got the point, that there's, when Herod was going to kill the baby child, and Mary and Joseph decided to escape, they escaped by running and hiding. They didn't go to Europe or to Mexico or to Italy to hide out, or England. They ran off to darkest Africa to hide out. Now, if Joseph and Mary not have the right color or complexion, there's no way they could have hid in darkest Africa. Or you take Samson. Now they talk about Delilah cutting off Samson's hair and cutting off the locks. Yes, he cut off the locks, but you all have to understand that Samson was a Danite. And a Danite in the Bible is an Ethiopian today. Go find any Ethiopian and see if he's got long, straight hair and see what kind of hair he's got. And the locks that Delilah cut off were dreadlocks. There is power in your blackness. And what we've done, we have ignored the powers of our blackness. God gave us gifts that we should be using. That's why you are supposed to be some of the strongest people on earth. That's why if you put a black person into any sport, he will dominate it if he's in there for a little while. He gave you biological and physiological strengths that other groups don't have. He gave you melanin in the skin to protect you from the sun. As our ozone layer continues to deteriorate, people who got light skin are going to be in a world of trouble. He gave you natural protection against the sun and ozone layers. You got protection in terms he gave you the gift. He gave you the gift of music. Nobody on earth can produce music like black folk. You have a natural genius for community music. You, in the whole world, for hundreds and hundreds of years, have been listening to and playing black music. You created everything from Dixieland to swing, to boogie woogie, to rhythm and blues, to bop, to gospel, to rap. All that came out of the black lexicon and the black experience. You have a genius for creating music, but you've never created an industry around where you can control it as wealth and power for your own people. Black people were given a gift from God for natural talent for dance. Nobody on earth can outdance a black person if he wants to dance. A typical black baby at 12 to 13 months and over can pick up rhythm and start doing the boogaloo for you. Those are natural gifts that God gave you as talents and skills that we've been burying, just like in Matthew, hiding from our blackness. God gave you all kind of talents. He says, go forth and use my gifts to protect yourself and your own people. And instead what we've done, we've abandoned it. We run around talking about anything other than blackness. We don't even want to be black. If I go up to a black person and say, what are you? Are you black? No, I'm not black. I'm a Gemini. I asked him, are you black? No, I'm an alpha. They will use any excuse to get away from being black. And that's why black folk right now in politics and our social organizations like to lay claims to the things like, well, Dr. Ansel, we're into diversity. Are you into black? No, I'm into multicultural. Are you black? No, I'm a person of color. And they've even gotten so bad now they even claim, well, no, I'm not black. I'm an African American. What is an African American? Nobody knows. We are the silliest people on earth. They don't want to be black. Now, anybody like my friend Stevie Wonder called me one morning and says, this is a little Stevie Doc. Why don't you ever use the word African American? That's because I'm not that silly. I don't use the word African American. I don't know what that is. I don't know what a minority is. What is a minority? Is that a one-eyed person, or is that a humpback or midget? What's a minority? I don't know what a minority is, and I don't know what an African American is. You see, because anybody that comes from Africa to America is an African American. If you come from Africa, we got white Berbers in Africa. We got white South Africans. We got white South Rhodesians. We got Jews. We got Pakistanians. We got East Indians. All of them that come to America can classify themselves as African American. As a matter of fact, we had one Pakistani that came to America, and he wanted to went to the University of Maryland and wanted to get a Banneker scholarship that was set aside for blacks. They wouldn't give him the scholarship. He went to court in Maryland and sued and won $150,000 because he says, I am a Pakistani, but I'm from Africa and I'm in America, so I'm an African American. And my people, have you not learned yet to get wisdom, as the Bible says, not only get wisdom, but get understanding. We don't understand the issues. You cannot go into a marketplace or into a political arena in a very broad, ambiguous term and win. You got to go in specifically focused on what you are and your people. We are the only people that won't do that. Women will go into the marketplace, they'll talk about women's issues or women's rights. Gays will go into the marketplace and talk about gay rights. Hispanics will talk about Hispanic rights. Indians talk about Indians' rights. Veterans talk about veterans' rights. Senior citizens talk about senior citizens' rights. You go into black folks and what are you talking about? I'm talking about civil rights. Who in the world is civil? Talk about your own people. Where does civil live? So I can send him something. I won't send him. I don't know who civil is. We won't play the game to win. And that's why we're in a massive move to get away from black folks, and we want to integrate. So every chance we get, we integrate. You cannot build wealth and power without staying together as a group. You must stay together as a group if you're going to get wealth and power. And when you integrate, you diffuse and scatter your resources and your power. Integration is a watering down process. And that's why we've been losing. We gave away our gifts and talents when you integrated. Black people had more before the integration process started than they got today. Integration was like going to, and I'm not talking about separation now, and I'm not talking about segregation. I don't want you all to get confused on those issues now. The issue should never be whether you want integration or segregation. That's not the question. They only ask that question to black people. They don't ask Indians or Asians or Jews, do y'all want integration or segregation? They only ask black folk that. I had a white person ask me down in Tallahassee, Florida once, well, Dr. Anderson, you're confusing us. You keep talking, we hear Martin Luther King talking about integration and Malcolm X talking about segregation. Which end of the stick do you all want? I don't want either end of the stick. I want black folk to be able to come together any place they want on that stick and pool their resources in the best interest of their own people. Integration and segregation is not the issue. The issue is coming together and uniting and pooling your resources. So integration then is like going out to the airport. You go out to the airport, and before you can go into the airport terminal, you got to turn around, you got to go through a security check. And when you go to the security, you got to take everything out of your wallet, out of your pockets. You got to take off your jacket, your shoes, your hat, your coat, your computer, your keys, your watch, your wallet, and put it all in a tray. And so it can pass through the inspection. And then you got to walk through semi-nude through a chain so they can inspect you to make sure that you're perfectly safe. And when you get to the other side, that's what's been happening to black folk. When black folk decide to integrate it, they took everything they own and put it on that tray. They put their black colleges on there, their black schools. They put their black communities. They put their black history. They put their black music. They put their black baseball teams, their black football teams. They put their black leadership. They put their black heritage and their blackness in a tray and send it through the screen so they can integrate. But when they got to the other side would not let them go back and pick up what they just put into the tray. And now black people inside the airport terminal, half nude, half naked, with nothing, trying to see if you're going to survive in our society. You don't own and control anything. The few things you had before integration, you gave them up. You don't have communities anymore. We're the only people in America that do not have one single solitary community. All we got are neighborhoods. A neighborhood is where you eat and sleep. The Holiday Inn is a neighborhood. A community is where you store your wealth, your power, your history, your culture, and you work as a unit. In Chicago, you got to find an area where you can build a black community. You got to build this community where you can go and spend all your money with your own people. And pooling your money with your own people is not hating anybody else. Now, don't mistakenly hear what I'm saying. I don't want you to hate anybody. Don't go out hating whites, Asians, Arabs, anybody else. I can't hate any whites because half my family was white. I got Indians in my family. I'm not against anybody else. It's just that I'm for black folk. Being for black folk doesn't mean I'm against anybody else. You got to go out and get your community and build your community, start putting your businesses in there. Take all the businesses in Chicago and bring them into one community and put them together in a block where you can go down there and shop. You cannot make it in business by setting up a store on different sides of the town. Nobody's going to get in their car and drive 200 miles to your store on the west, then turn around and drive another 100 miles to somebody else's store on the east. You got to put them all in one neighborhood where blacks can go shop and get everything they want, get all the things they need in one spot. You understand what I'm saying? You got to come together. And what we are doing is that we, as black folk, don't understand that. We keep trying to set up a business here and there. If you don't have a community, then you don't have what? You don't have a customer base. If you scatter yourself out, nobody's going to come see you. You're going to go out of business. We as black folk got to build communities and build our businesses there. Why? Because your money must bounce 8 to 12 times before it leaves the black community. In this society, the reason those other groups got more power than you have, they make their money bounce 8 to 12 times in their own community. Hispanic money bounces 6 to 7 times before it leaves a Hispanic hand. White money bounces 8 to 12 times. Arab and Asian money bounces 13 to 14 times. Jewish money bounces 18 times. Black money doesn't bounce once. As soon as a black person gets paid, he runs right to a store that's not owned by blacks. He goes to the white suburbs and spends 96% of his money in the white suburbs. And then he comes back and spends another 2 to 3% in his own community into other businesses that are not owned by blacks. And the reason these other groups are doing better than you're doing, and why we're suffering, as it was in Matthews, the reason we're suffering is because we're not playing the game to win. We're not playing real-life Monopoly. You're spending your money now in other people's businesses. You're subsidizing them. When somebody down in Texas asked me, he said, Dr. Anderson, how is it that whites can have all these big homes, these big nice neighborhoods with all these fancy cars? Say, where do they get the money from? I said, it's easy, it's your money. Everybody in this country lives off of 2 incomes, except black folk. Whites live off of 98% of black folks' money and 100% of their own. Black folk are trying to live off of 2% of their income. It is impossible for you to live off of 2% of your income. And if you're only keeping 2% of your money in your own community, with your own people in your own businesses, that means that in terms of personal net worth as a group, you aren't worth more than 2%. That's why you go to a bank and the bank asks black folk, what are y'all worth? Y'all only worth 2 cents. You got to learn how to hold your money in and practice group economics. And that's what I'm doing in all my books, all over the country, and I'm telling black folk all over the world. Learn how to practice group economics, practice group politics, and learn how to build communities around it. To have a community, you must have 3 elements to have a community. You must have a wholly independent economic structure that would provide services and goods and tax base and products for your own people. That's the first key to having a community. The second thing you must have is a code of conduct that will teach you how to buy from, support, and spend your money with your own people. And the third thing you must have people in politics who will go out and fight for you and protect you and speak for you. We don't have those things, so we are suffering. And what I'm telling black folk around the world is that the game is almost over for us. We're playing real-life Monopoly and we're losing. As we go into this recession, this depression, if you don't get your act together, we're not going to come out. We're going to be an underclass by 2010, and by 2015, they're projected that maybe 50% of all the black people on the earth might turn around and disappear. And we're losing approximately 287,000 black people dying every month in Africa for the lack of food, water, and medicine. In this country, you're talking about Katrina, and everybody's worried about Katrina in New Orleans. You got Katrinas all over America that you're not recognizing. The Pew Foundation, charitable foundation, came out in January and ranked top cities in the United States, the worst cities. And the 10 worst cities in the United States are cities where blacks are the majority population. Detroit is the worst of all. They're the most dangerous places to live. They all look like Beirut bombed out Iraq. And we live like animals because we won't play real life Monopoly to win. We won't learn how to pool our resources. We're scared of our own blackness. The genius and the talents that God has given us is our blackness. We run away from ourselves. We try to integrate. We try to be everything other than black. But black is power. Black is the most powerful thing on this earth. You got the potential to be powerful people if you unite and pool your resources. I know most of you are not going to do it. You're not going to do it in conclusion because of this. There was a little story I'll tell about. A guy was living out in a rural area, and he was a very religious man. And a flood came, and the dam broke. And his neighbor came to him and said, the dam is broken. The waters are coming. You got to get out of the valley. You got to get out fast. And this old man says, no, I'm not going to go. He says, I'm a religious practitioner. I believe in God. He and I have always been close together. I'm going to stay here with my family and wait on God. Later that night, the waters rose up to the second floor, and he took his family to the second floor. At that time, he prayed to God and said, God, I've been praying all night, but I haven't heard from you. Please come save me and my family. And within a few minutes, he heard a horn blowing. He looked out the window, and there's a Coast Guard out there with a boat saying, we're here to save your family. Come on, get on board. We're leaving because the flood's going to get worse. He said, no, I'm sitting here waiting for God. God's going to save me. I've been a humble, respectful man all my life. I'm not going to leave here. And then later on, about early in the morning hours, the flood waters had gotten so high, he went onto the roof. When he got on the roof, he prayed, said, God, I'm on the roof now with my family, myself. Please come save us. And then within a matter of minutes, a helicopter showed up. And the helicopter says, we're here. Do you need help? He said, no, I'm sitting here waiting for God. And when the sun rose, both he and his family had been drowned. When he got to heaven, he was very concerned. He went to God and said, God, I don't understand why I'm dead and why my family's here with me. All are dead. He said, we prayed for you. We were always respectful and humble and obedient people. Why didn't you come when we prayed? And what God said, he says, I did come. I came 3 times. He said, you remember that neighbor that came? He said, that was me, and I sent him. He said, that Coast Guard man came. I sent him. That was me in my image. And he says, and when the helicopter came, the pilot, that was me and in my image. And so I guarantee anybody this morning, I'll make one promise to you. I'll give $1,000 to anybody in this congregation who can prove to me that God did not send me to save black folk on this earth. Thank you.